I'm so glad y'all are here. This is a topic very near and dear to my heart, something that I have experienced myself and I see happening with a lot of graduate students and faculty supervisors is how is that supervisory role and that supervisory relationship, how is it going? How are things being managed? What are some issues? What are some good things? What are some best practices? And so I hope that y'all get a lot of good ideas today and advice, recommendations. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I also just posted into the chat a couple of files for you that I will be using today, referring to today, and also that I hope that you can use, you can take back to your department in your own role. So make sure that you see those. There's the Teaching with TAs checklist for faculty, the faculty supervisors, mentors, our webinar actual slides, and then a setting expectations template. So please do feel free to post questions as we go. I like to address them as we go and not wait until the end. I'd rather have a much more productive conversational session for all of you. So what we'll be looking at today is quite a few things and refer y'all to some really great resources that I pulled pretty strongly from that have been helpful to for me to see what is important for me to be able to address that with all of you. So we're going to talk a little bit about supervision versus mentorship, but mostly about what those good practices are and some supervisory models to help you do that and think about how you're doing that, and specifically to ensure equity and equality. And so what I did prior to this webinar was ask the past 2.5 years of graduate students that have gone through my TA orientation to complete a survey for me, giving me some feedback as to what their experiences have been. And one of the biggest ones, which we'll look at what those are, is equity and equality. So we're going to talk about that specifically as well as others, and what to do when problems arise. I see a very broad array of departments here. That's wonderful. Also a broad array of responsibilities from faculty tenure track, staff, supervisors, clinical, just all sorts of folks. So that's great that everyone is here. And I think when I started thinking about this, when you think about supervision of TAs and you look at the research that's out there, the research out there is a lot more on graduate student research type of supervision and mentorship. But I found some of resources have tried to take that and really push it towards how that's something that you can use in your role as a supervisor for graduate teaching assistants who are essentially working for you, helping you do your own specific role, not so much research itself. And so what I've seen is that there's supervision and then there's mentorship. And so supervision is you're overseeing this TA doing a task, with this task having needs to be done. It needs to be done correctly on time. So it's a much more task oriented type of role. And then mentorship, as y'all know, is much more advising, counseling students, more of a professional development type of role, broader scholarly assistance and advice on that. But they can be meshed together well. And so you can, as a supervisor, perhaps you should, it really depends on a lot of things, which we'll talk about, but you can have in your supervisory role, have both of those. But it also does depend on what the student is doing for you, their role, but also the stage of the student. Sometimes they just need supervision. Sometimes the mentorship is what they need right now. And those of you who have had lots of mentorship supervisory experience are, recognize that and have seen that in action. And there's research out there that shows, of course, that good supervision, whether it's for students doing clinicals or students who are doing research experience, has this very positive impact on the graduate student experience as a whole, as well as retention of students, of having them stay in the degree, complete the degree. And so your your position as a supervisor is impactful. It's really important that you see that you are helping this, of course, helping the student, even as a supervisor, say of a grader, you are helping the student see what it's like to be an academic and helping them to recognize what they need to learn how to do, but also to really help them persist in that role and persist in academia. So let's look at what it is that we as supervisors of TAs, how can we improve our supervisory practice? Things that we can think about. And so I'm going to talk about what those best practices are in general, and then talking about recognizing what your style is. And I'm going to put a couple of plugs for some other campus office resources that can help with this, and then what we can do when problems arise and the feedback from students themselves. So good supervisors, y'all can probably come up with these yourselves. You know, you set out expectations, clearly set out expectations. I want to emphasize that because that is something that doesn't happen in several situations. And we'll talk about what students have said in a little bit. Providing them guidance, and not just guidance in that they're going to grade and they're going to be in the classes, but how to do that, the specifics of that. And I think it's so important, and this is something I remind myself as well, not just with graduate TAs, but, with students, undergraduate students don't know how to adult yet. Well, graduate students don't know how to graduate student yet. They don't know how to TA yet. And so providing that guidance of things you just automatically assume students know, we really can't do that anymore. So stepping back and thinking about that is really important. Being accessible, this is something with respect to, of course, communication, making sure that you respond to them, but also making sure that they feel comfortable coming and talking to you. And we'll look at some issues that have cropped up with that. And providing this supportive, respectful work environment. And you want students to feel comfortable. You want them to realize that if they make a mistake, hey, it's okay. Come talk to me. Let's talk about what we can do. How can we mitigate a particular situation? Being respectful in how you interact and engage with the students. And you as the faculty, you as the staff member, you are helping students navigate how the institution works. You usually, although sometimes I feel like when things happen and don't go wrong and where I go for resources, I'm not sure where to go, and I've been here for 12 years. So, but you still are someone who is aware of what those policies and procedures are, of how to handle situations with students or with academic integrity. And provide students with feedback. Don't assume that if you don't say anything to them, they think everything's fine. That, I promise you, is not what they're thinking. So you want to make sure you provide them with good, clear feedback on what they're doing, how things are going with the students, letting them know as well. And then if problems do crop up, handling it timely and with compassion and clarity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So let me ask you guys, with this list, this all came from a wonderful resource from the University of Toronto, which I've listed in the resources on at the end of the presentation. Let me ask you, so how would you rank these? Which of these, and I've lettered them here, would you rank as the number one of those 7 good practices? Which would you say is number one that supervisors of graduate TAs should do? A, okay. Yeah, I tried to not list it with my own perspective and assumptions, but yeah. G, okay, handle problems in timely fashion. Yeah. So A was setting out expectations. F, clear, honest feedback. Yep. D, supportive, respectful work environment. Good. Yep. I like that there's different ones here. A and G. All of them are number one. Yeah. Likely so. There are the reason why I ask y'all to do this is this really helps you to start seeing, which we're going to see in a second, that there are different styles of supervision, which depends on a lot of different things. Let me also ask you, what might you add that you don't see listed here? And these can kind of be more encompassing than they seem. Is there anything that you might add here as a good supervisor? Means of accountability. Yes. Oh, that's a really great one. Yes. Equal opportunity for all the students. Yeah, we're actually going to come back we'll talk about that. Yes. Good. Boundaries, because there's likely a dual relationship. Yes, 100%. I would say that fits into the supportive, respectful work environment, but we're going to talk about that. Sometimes need to be a little firm. Yeah. Guidance, with strong guidance, I should say. Thoughtfulness of time. Yes. And that goes into a couple of these of expectations, but also a respectful work environment. Uh-huh. Yeah. So clear expectations in the departments and programs in advance, not just assume things. Yes. And I will briefly touch on that too. Y'all have really great responses, y'all. That's awesome. So we're going to talk about many of the things that y'all have mentioned. Check-in meetings, regular check-in meetings. Yes. I would say that might fall into the clearly set out expectations. Yeah. Acknowledge and celebrate good work, which would be perhaps part of D. 100%. Yeah. I remember when I was doing my postdoc, I did my postdoc at Rutgers, and of course doing research here, but I was doing something, I had some data that I had analyzed and put together. And she said something to me, my advisor said something to me that has stuck with me. She said, and I, I don't know why it did, but it has. She just said, "Well done." I was like, "Oh my God, thank you." So those little things, I mean, I'm 52 now, and that has stuck with me for basically 20 years, essentially, so 15 years. So let's look at these fundamentals. So we've talked about what are good practices, but let's put them into a little bit broader categories. Fundamentals of really good effective supervision. So maintaining that effective, having it and maintaining that effective communication. So making sure you talk with your students. What are those expectations in advance? Reiterating it on occasion, regularly as needed. And this really helps to prevent, as y'all just said, those assumptions. Those assumptions can be very wrong. Those misunderstandings can come from those, and it allows your students to be confident in what they're doing and be successful and feel like that they're a part of the unit of the department, which I heard some issues with some of the students that gave me feedback. Being accessible. So this is getting to know your students, building that strong mentoring relationship with them, but making sure that you're there when they need you, not being hard to find or hard to get to respond, and giving the respect. It really is a big issue that you ensure that you establish between you and your grad TA this mutual respect where you both are respecting each other's time, each other's effort, each other's abilities of where you are in those abilities, your outside needs. We'll talk about all of those. And then respecting the diversity. So students have, and I sort of mentioned that there, but students have differences in what they're bringing to graduate school and as their TA in general, especially if they are coming from different cultures, they are coming from a different nationality, genders, abilities, life circumstances. All of those need to be part of your understanding of who this is as a person. This impacts, yes, what they can do. Yes, they can help you, and they are doing these things as part of their role. But these things, life happens. These things are going to come into play with what they are able to do at certain points in time. So being aware of that and respecting that. Okay. Some of y'all may be familiar with this. There is a really wonderful series of workshops in human resources, organizational professional development on how to be a good supervisor. And I took this many, many years ago, and this was the first time I had ever seen it. So I was in this role, as have gone through my PhD postdoc teaching and had never heard about this, what's called a situational leadership model. And it's originally from Blanchard. They actually have a new book out, third edition on this. Lots of websites have information on this, but it's this idea of a good leader, in this situation, a good leader, but also as a supervisor, your style can be these 4 different types of styles where you can see that it's directing, coaching, supporting, and delegating. And what style you use depends on the developmental level of your staff member or of your mentee, where someone who is just learning how to do things is this D1 development level, where they eventually, based on your supervision and support and mentorship, then goes through those stages to become very highly competent and high commitment to the work. And what I thought was interesting about this is that this is a leadership model. It applies directly to your mentorship of graduate students, of TAs, and people have looked at that in that capacity. One of the quotes in this book is over supervising or under supervising, where you're giving them too much or too little direction, can actually have a negative impact on their development. Being a good boss or not a good boss. If you're on Twitter or Threads, you hear those stories about those, and I just cringe when I read some of those. And so that's why it's important for you as the supervisor to match what your leadership, or in our case, what your supervision style is, to the level that students are at. And what that level is will depend on a lot of situational and personal and academic factors. Okay. Has anyone attended those workshops that HR gives or OPD gives on the supervisory role for either staff or faculty? Yeah, they are really good. I was just blown away. I still have all of my resources from that because I learned so much from that. If you haven't, go. It's absolutely worth your time to do those. Okay. So in academia, those supervisory styles are pretty similar. Like I said, there's a lot of different influencing factors, and it is something that can vary across different units and disciplines. Of course, it will vary with personalities and individuals, but like I said, those supervisory styles likely will and do and should change with the phases that the student is in, whether they're just learning how to be a TA, or they've been a TA, they're actually now an instructor of record, have been teach for 3-4 years. Of course, your supervisory style will change, although there are still those fundamental aspects that you should always do. So you, as a faculty member, need to be aware of what your strengths and weaknesses are as a supervisor, to find and make sure that you're supporting the student that you have, not the one that you expect to have, not the TA that you expect to have. And so you can make sure that they have the best experience and best opportunities available to them. So you, as the supervisor, need to think about this. You need to have a frank talk with yourself. And I'm sure there's probably questionnaires out there. I just never came across one. But what is your supervisory style? Thinking about it, what do I need to do? What am I not doing? And I'll talk about ways that you can find this out in a little bit towards the end of the webinar. But you should do this, and that will make you a better supervisor. And that will then, of course, translate into every aspect of your role as faculty, honestly. So even so, whatever style it is, and this is one back in 1977 that was done, should still all incorporate, best practices. I show you this particular model because it was kind of one of the original ones that a lot of people have built on. That situational leadership one built on this very similarly, but the academic ones have built on this as well. And so Blanchard was the one that developed that one that I had showed you here, that they then built that into the situational leadership model that is so well known. So the one I wanted to show y'all is called the Gatfield model, and is very much tailored to academia and research, really graduate research. But I like it in that it can also is very good ways to visualize you as a supervisor for your TAs. So there are these two axes, of course. So this is a quadrat, basically. And so you have the structure axis component, so your x-axis, where you go from low structure. This is, management process. You telling them what the schedules are, what the deadlines are, giving them feedback. So you can have low emphasis on those tasks. You don't tell them much, or you have high emphasis on that task, high structure. You're very specific in what they do, very detail oriented in what information you give them. This is something that you can negotiate with your student by being in the style that you supervise. What do you need from me? How can I help you? What resources do you need from me? And so the structure access components is what you as a supervisor are providing, what level that is. The y-axis is the support components. The Gatfield described it as non-directive, which means that it's not something that you're telling the students what to do, it's the support that you provide for them. It's also kind of optional, which, that's what he said in the article, although I don't know that I agree with that, but that's my own personal opinion. So being aware of student needs, building their confidence, providing them with opportunities. This also incorporates the institutional level of support. Do they have workspace? Are there manuals and policies that are set out by the department as to what expectations are for the supervisor and supervisee? How much funding do they have? What resources are available to them? So there can be high support and there can be low support. And how he organized this was that when you have really high support, whether it is you providing support, personally, sensitivity, that's called the pastoral style. If you have low support, it's more of the laissez-faire, hands-off type of approach. And the high structure and high support is what they call contractual, which is, you're providing the support, you're providing the structure. What do you need? Here's what you need, very specific. And then the high structure, but low support is directorial, doing this, just get it done. And I have seen with the comments from the TAs, this entire breadth of styles. And it is a spectrum. Again, so like with that situational leadership model, you can pass through some of these back and forth as needed, depending on what your students' needs are, okay, as necessary. Any questions or comments about this particular style? And as you're typing, I really particularly like, again, that it matches well with that leadership style, the situational leadership style. So with the Gatfield model, so going back to the pastoral, the supervisor is providing lots of personal support, but not necessarily in a task directive capacity. So I'm providing great support. I'm here for you, but I'm not necessarily telling you what to do. And it may be an environment that has low structure. So whatever you want to do, just grade how you want. That's more pastoral. And it's also maybe a little laissez-faire. So this can be, depending on the student and depending on you, really more depending on the student where they are, it can be transformational in that the student can really discover what they can do and what they really like about teaching, or in research as well. When you look at, so on the people emphasis, the support axis, when you have a supervisor who is really not giving direction, not committed to interaction, hard to find, hands off, they may be caring, but they're very not, some people call this non-interference, just not much structure. This is more of I've seen it called individualism, where the student really has to be able to be a self-starter, be able to find their resources. Not many graduate students can do this. It depends on a lot of their past experiences. So that, again, that's the laissez-faire model style. And so when you have very low structure in these two particular styles, your students need to have more independence. And a lot of them don't, because they don't know how to do that yet. They just haven't had the experience to develop that. Some are more self-starters and can develop that, but most can't. And not that that's a bad thing. They're just not at that point yet in their development, okay? And then when you look at the other side, you've got, with the high structure and high support, it's also been called democratic as well as contractual. So let's work together to do this. What do you need? Here's what I can provide to you. And so it provides good direction, good management, interpersonal relationships. And so that compared to your directorial, which has also been called autocratic. I think that's an interesting comparison there, where you do have this close connection and discussion. So there's lots of structure to it, but there's not a lot necessarily of help, or I would say support, people emphasis, you could say. There's not a lot of other interaction. So it's just very much go do this, let me know if there's any problems, and that's all. So that I think with this structure versus of low structure versus high structure students. So in the high structure here, you've got students that you need much more direction being given to students. Okay. So coming back to what's being typed in, how much open we are to different styles based on the dynamic of the interactions with the TA, their needs and experiences, and mentor are, or are we only accepting certain styles as a perceived standard? So what do you mean by that? So are you saying that, are you open, or are we being specific? We're being very set in our ways. I think actually that's probably what you're saying. I think that you as the supervisor need to not let yourself be set in your ways unless it's something that's really, really working, and you're getting feedback from your students, but being open to changing your style as needed by the TA. And let's see, it can be a delicate conversation when the student believes they are ready for laissez-faire guidance, but they are not. Yes, and then that can be where are, how can you manage this assumption that the student has without them thinking that, oh, you're criticizing them, and saying, well, I hear that you think that you can, let me still give you some guidelines and some templates. There's different ways to approach that, but yeah, that's a really good point. And like I said, I would say that I've had my advisors that I have had have probably been across all of these at different times in my career, as well as different times in my education as I went through graduate school and postdoc and staff. And so a couple more things about the Gatfield model. The good thing about this, and y'all have just touched on this, is it helps you figure out whether or not, or why your supervisory relationship is good or not, or why it's unsatisfying, or why students are upset about something, or not doing, or not able to do what you've been asking them to do. It really helps you to assess that. And sometimes your students may need higher levels of support, but they're not getting it because the structure style is more of that laissez-faire structure level. And so there's a mismatch in need, and there's no communication about what those needs are. Or a student may feel like they're not given enough autonomy because it is more directorial. And so they are not feeling like they are given the autonomy, but also they're not being trusted by their supervisor if they're not being given enough autonomy. And this goes back to what you just said. Are they at that level that they can? And so I think that it's conversations where you as the supervisor can say, I know this is what you think you're able to do. Let's see, let's do this and see how you do. If we need to back up on certain things, if I can give you more, freedom, this is how we can find this out. So having those open, honest conversations is really important. But do know that none of these really are inherently wrong in their styles. It's that it depends on how you are, how you do things, but where your student is. It's just that making sure that whatever style you are, or wherever you are on the spectrum, you are making sure that you still have those best practices, and you're matching what it is the student and your TA needs from you and what they're capable of doing on their own. And that may not be something that initially. You may not really get a handle on that until like mid-semester. And so that will then dictate your style of how you're helping your TA. Okay. Really want to emphasize the importance of ensuring equality and equity with your students. And there's lots of things in here. We could have an entire webinar on this, but recognize, and this goes back to realizing that things are very different than they used to be. I know y'all hear that all the time, but our TA's experiences will be are different from us, from the supervisors and other TAs due to many different aspects. So things such as their age, and I know y'all are aware of this, but this is what shapes how they interact with you, how they interact with the department and other colleagues, what they volunteer to do, what they feel like they're capable of doing. So their age, their gender, not just the gender of the student, but the gender difference or similarity between the supervisor and supervisee. Their race, whether they see, someone who looks like them and recognizes that this is someone who would understand the situations that they may be dealing with or are coming from. Ability, so disabilities of students versus your supervisor, being aware of those and the needs for some of those. Even things like religion, ideological beliefs, those can impact how you or your supervisee, your TA, interacts with each other, especially, and I emphasize nationality because a lot of what I have seen, in the literature and discussion on some of these websites and from students is it's really important, especially if you have an international student or if you are international, recognizing that y'all have, or different nationalities have, or different countries and different cultures have different ways of interacting with people in positions of authority or power. And so I want to recommend, if you haven't or attended the International Student Services, but they give workshops and webinars, and I know they did it last semester. I'm not sure if they did this semester with CTE, but just on working with international students, recognizing how different cultures view how to approach people who are in positions of power, or how to talk to them or being deferential to them. There is so many differences, and you may not be aware of that with your students. That's why they're not asking you questions, because in their culture, that would be seen as very offensive to the person in power. So let's see, my question was, do departments open to different styles based on the dynamic of the mentor? Oh, I see. So making sure that the department is open to the fact that there are going to be differences, that there does need to be flexibility. And so, yeah, you get at one of the issues of, it's not just the mentor, mentee, TA, supervisor, it's also the departmental recognition of what's going on, how are things being handled. It's okay that there's differences, but let's make sure that when there are differences, it's still being done appropriately with best practices. Thank you for saying that. So going back to equity and equality, your students are at these different life stages. So wherever they are, this is why having those conversations is so important. Finding out what it is that they need, how can they help you, but then checking in, is this working? Do we need to modify this? Students have very different schedules. They're going to have very different time constraints. So they may have families, they may have childcare issues. They can't stay till 7 at night because they have to go pick up their kid from daycare or school, or they have family at home that they're taking care of. So they can't spend 10 hours, a day, and I'm being, grossly exaggerating, but spending 8 hours a day grading or doing research, because they have these other responsibilities that are equally important and must be factored into those expectations that you have and that y'all talk about for their particular role as a TA for you. They may be part-time students. They may be taking 1 or 2 classes. And so they may be working full-time somewhere else as a professional. So you're thinking about that they don't necessarily have the time. If you give them, papers to grade or, exams to grade and asking them to have those turned in by tomorrow, that's not going to happen. And that's an really inappropriate expectation to have, is that they can do that. So that requires planning on the part of the supervisor to make sure that if this is something that you need turnaround quickly, let's make sure that we build that time in, or just recognizing that quick turnaround just simply isn't possible. So let's talk about other options. What can we do? And then, as I said, changes in personal circumstances. So life happens, students get sick, something's going on, they may need to take, a leave of absence, whatever it might be, being aware that that can and will happen in different, situations, but also being compassionate and empathetic that it does happen, and not putting stress on them when this very stressful thing is happening, making it harder for them to be able to achieve what it is that you're wanting them to do. And then, of course, as I've already just talked about, cultural communication styles, students not feeling comfortable questioning a professor, questioning the instructor of record, saying, oh, there's a mistake there, or even going to ask questions that you may say, oh, my office's door is always open. Feel free to come ask me questions. That's not their cultural nature to do that. So have a procedure where this is how they ask those questions. This is what you ask them to do, not just to drop by, but, send me an email, put it in the subject. This is what we are, is it time sensitive? That type of supervisory information. So what are reasonable expectations of GAs? Are those written somewhere? So that is a great question. I think that reasonable expectations, I think that those reasonable expectations are thinking about what is doable. So of course it's context dependent, but thinking about what is doable for a student with respect to the context of where they are, asking them, do you have the time to do this? If not, how can we get this done in a timely manner? So not expecting them to do things on your time, but also being aware and cognizant that they have classes that they're taking, research, clinicals, other jobs if they're having to do that, again, family issues. So those are things that you want to, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, you want to have a discussion with your TA of what those expectations are, but it also needs to be in the contract. And I think this is something that departments have discovered that they're struggling with, is like if they even have TA contracts, and if they do have TA contracts, what is explicitly expected of them? How are things laid out? What are those expectations? And that's where the idea of really kind of planning time, but really documenting time, so you can see where students are spending time. Perhaps they're not managing their time well, or they're spending too much time on something when you wanted them to do something else. That can help a lot as well. But it really is something that the department needs to have conversations about as to how students are, what their expectations are, how much time. But giving them 40 hours of work a week when they're being paid for 10, that obviously, I mean, again, an over exaggeration, I hope, is something that you want to make sure that is not happening. Okay. Continuing with that, students, as I said, may not feel comfortable bringing up issues. So making sure that students are in an environment where they feel like you are there to help them explore what options there are. How can we arrange this and manage this that is beneficial to both of us? Okay. And making sure that you don't have hidden biases. There's a great questionnaire from Project Implicit by Harvard University to see if you have hidden or unknown biases. If you've not taken that, it's pretty illuminating, I think, for anyone who does take that. So just really making sure that you clarify, these are my expectations. If you're not able to do these, or if something comes up, talk to me immediately. Let's have a conversation about what we can do, just from the beginning and weekly for each task that you're having them do. So when problems do arise, often it comes from, and this is on both sides, personality factors where there's no communication barriers, as I just mentioned, due to gender, race differences, class, personality clashes, and just different working styles. And so that then goes back to recognizing your students, your TAs are their own persons. They bring their own experiences as well. And then professional factors. So again, when there are these unrealistic expectations, or there's this mismatch of, here are my expectations of what you do, but then no guidance is actually given to the students for how to do that. Best ways, giving them rubrics or giving them answer keys. I mean, I've heard it all. Or students not listening to you, not listening to the guidance that you're giving them, thinking that they know what they're doing, they're able to do this, and then still doing it wrong. Or students just not able to do the task. They don't have the skills that you thought they did, or they thought that they did, in order to be able to do those tasks. So that's the major areas where problems arise. So what I want to show y'all is some of the comments that TAs told in this completely anonymous survey. I didn't collect any demographics. I asked them these 8 questions. Did they have a positive or negative experience with their faculty, TA supervisor, or instructor of record? In what aspect did the supervision excel? What was it that was most beneficial or helpful? What aspect of the supervision did the supervisor struggle? and what was it that was most problematic. So things like communication, resources, time expectations. And then what could the faculty member have done differently, and what could you have done differently? And then what guidance would you have liked to have had from your faculty member, as well as what do you wish your faculty member was more aware of? Okay. So this is not all of them. These were some really ones that really hit me, and I want to emphasize a few things. I'm going to kind of read through these pretty quickly, but you also have the slides that has this content on it. So communication expectations. The student needed to know the expectations, what they need me to do to help. I needed their expertise. I needed their feedback to know what to improve. At times, I was unable to understand what the mentor was asking. So this was a situation with international students and an international supervisor. But we worked it out over time. I was initially reticent in clarifying my doubts because that was just what the culture is. But now they have the freedom, they feel the freedom to ask things over until they have clarity. It seems like there wasn't one person designated to be my supervisor. So this is a higher level issue with perhaps the department itself. So it's currently the first week of classes and I still don't know what I'm supposed to do. So there's lack of communication and supervision. The supervisor, the faculty are unable to understand that I think that's supposed to be understand, but apprehend non-verbal instructions or implied messages. So this person may be maybe on the ADHD spectrum, where this is just not the way their brain works. So I wish they were more direct with me. So this is something that you would be able to find out if you got to know your student a little bit better, what their needs were. I'm still not sure what my role is. I want this assistantship to help me, but I've not got that. Clear goals are needed from the start. So your students know what they need, or many of them do. So having those conversations. This was an interesting one. In order to make sure students are receiving the instruction that they need and they're prepared, supervisors need to double check what is being taught, that the TAs have access to the materials and it's consistent. So this particular TA said that they were told y'all are adults. So there's just multiple sections being told what to do. You're adults, figure it out between yourselves. It's not helpful, especially if the content is new or experience that a TA doesn't have. And the students recognizes, the TAs recognizes, the undergrads suffer. There needs to be consistency in the teaching, grading, content, and support. Okay, so that's with multi-section courses. Specific steps needed for labs that were not given, breakdown of grading guidelines, explanation of what to do when things go wrong. So when you put students in lab sections or, even recitation sessions, do they know how to do the things they're asked to do? Yes, we as faculty and staff, when we were graduate students, it may have been, we had to figure it out, but that's really not the way our students are. This the way that they think, the way that they are able to do things. So even though that's how we did things, and I know y'all have heard this before, it's not necessarily the right thing or the good thing for the students that we have now. Okay, so they do need more guidance. This one worried me. Supervisors should share all homework assignment solutions, the syllabus, and any rubrics, giving them access to those resources so that they're well prepared and aligned with the expectations and helping students. Lack of guidance, again, concerning resources, no supervision of the team. This was an interesting one. So there was a team of TAs. It may have been multi-sections. I'm not sure. I don't know. But they didn't work as a team, but just individuals who taught and graded differently. Those who were experienced were fine. Those who were new were left on their own because there wasn't guidance from the other teammates. So that's a lack of supervisory guidance of a team. I wasn't given any direction beyond general vague concepts of what we might do. I would have appreciated knowing what my purpose was and how I can help the department. So they want that help from you. They want those details and that guidance. And you may be providing that, and that's wonderful, but some TAs are not getting that. And I think departments need to be more cognizant that that might be going on in their departments. Respect and professionalism issues. So I wish my supervisor was more aware that I have responsibilities outside of my TA. And if a request is made at the last minute, may not be able to respond. Realistic expectations for what can be done. And I love this one. Faculty sometimes forget how they got to know what they know. So making sure that faculty recognize that helping them get to the point that they need to be. Realistic expectations based off the students' degrees of responsibilities. I think this is a really important one that departments need to hear. That first and second year grad students are likely completing coursework, will struggle with time management if teaching assignments can take students' standing into consideration and assigned more intensive courses to those who have finished their coursework. And I know that's not always possible, but that's something to think about. My supervisor didn't communicate the expectations and asked me to do tasks that were not outlined in my TA contract, and was hoping that they could then make changes midway to the contract. We had a supervisor unorganized, brought up personal baggage to their meetings, didn't know what they were supposed to be doing. They could be more understanding with personal issues, give warnings before canceling meetings, show professional boundaries in what was asked to do. And then being yelled at and told we were the worst group of TAs they've ever had is not conducive to being better TAs. So I know these are like the extreme negatives, but I want y'all to see that this is happening. And in your department, there needs to be more guidelines and procedures for what is good practice of TAs, of what their expectations are, your expectations are. What could have been done differently? This is what the student said. What was expected, getting all that information. It seemed like it was changing by the week and they were getting angry, when we didn't know something. Or I could have asked them directly. For students just aren't comfortable yet being able to do that. Being more tactful and professional in communication style, having team meetings, giving over direction and supervision of the team. I really like this comment. Pre-assumptions or assumptions are hindered the quality of the teaching that the students were able to provide. Best aspects. There were a lot, y'all. Really amazing mentorship and supervision. So professionalism, encouraging, communicative, gave us resources, tons of resources and guidance. We had to negotiate time and workload expectations, but we are at a happy middle ground. So it's definitely doable. Willing to make time if I approach them. Beneficial time expectations of how much time things should take. Clarity of responsibilities, available to answer questions, sharing the homework and solutions. And I love this one. Peek into the instructor life of how things go as a faculty member, meeting to discuss what was going on in the class and how it handles situations. Opportunity to take on as much I know y'all are aware of that. So if you're going to develop a solution, you're going to have to, you and the student need to be able to provide compromise and flexibility. Students and supervisors have a shared responsibilities for preventing and resolving conflict. It's not just on the faculty member. It's not just on the student. It needs to be both of you working together. So if something happens, start early to prevent it from escalating, ball rolling downhill, does gather moss and guts, all of those fun little quotes. So managing that conflict with understanding and anticipating where issues are going to arise and handling them in a timely fashion if it does happen. What are their expectations that you have, responsibilities, so that those misunderstandings don't happen. Being open to different solutions. Different people have different perspectives. Again, your students are a very different position that you are, of where they are in their lives, what their needs are. And so avoiding assumptions of what the students do and don't know, that's a big one, or generalizations that all of my TAs are that way. And it may be that what the issue is going on is not actually, the root cause is not what has been stated. So kind of really digging into, all right, what is really going on here, having those conversations. And just making sure that you're clear, acknowledging that this is how I'm feeling. Of course, emotions can be difficult to work with, but being able to tackle that problem respectfully, being clear, being tolerant, all of those, making sure that it is a respectful discussion, and knowing that there is that power imbalance. So they may not feel like that they can speak freely, or they may fear that there's going to be retaliation or recrimination. So having that discussion about how do we handle these situations? How do you bring concerns to me? That is really important to have with your supervisory role and with your TAs. And if things are you're still struggling, get advice and support, of course, other faculty members, your department chair, those resources that I have in this presentation. There's a lot of really great resources for faculty, specifically the University of Toronto one. So GTAs, they value supervisors if you're accessible, you're professional, approachable, comfortable environment, you're encouraging, being a good person, open and flexible, and being supportive. And those supervisors, y'all are out there. There were so many really great comments about these. My supervisor was wonderful, and they're doing all these things that I need. So it's definitely, again, this is something that does come with experience, both with you and with the TA, but those best practices are really important that you're ensuring that are being set in place for you, for the department, for other faculty members. So being sure you communicate well, tolerant and understanding, holding each other to high standards, but treating each other with dignity and respect, and managing those conflicts respectfully. And then, of course, the unit also is important in providing clarity as to what those supervisory roles are and should have and should be, what those expectations should be, what the time constraints might be, holding those standards high, and if necessary, intervening when it is something does happen. Okay. These are the resources I wanted to mention to you. Some of these are some of those models, but particularly the Teaching with GSIs one is very good. And then very particularly the Supervision Guidelines from University of Toronto. And so I am happy to answer. We're about 5 minutes over time, but I'm happy to answer any questions or discuss anything. If you want to email me individually and talk about a particular issue or get some more guidance on a situation, that's what I'm here for. Okay. Oh, absolutely. Please do share everything you got here. Let me put also the Word document so that you can edit it. Take those checklists, modify them as needed. Take that template, modify them as needed. That's what they're for, resources for y'all.